Hello, colleagues. Welcome to this very short session where I want to talk about the first topic in commercial law, which is sale of goods. Sale of goods. Kindly note that when we talk about commercial law, it has nothing to do with accounting. And so people that are afraid of numbers, adding numbers, think that, hey, I'm coming to do commercial law and it's something that I'm not comfortable with and all that, right? So we are not talking about balancing of shits here and all that, right? So this is something that you can do. All you have to do is to make sure that you are connected with JCC, right? So the statute that we would need to understand the sale of goods contract is the Sale of Goods Act 1962, Act 137. I encourage you to get a copy of the Sale of Goods Act. Now, the Sale of Goods Act is the domestic law of the sale of goods in Ghana, right? This passed, which was passed in 1962. At that time, it had 8 parts, and Part 8 contained provisions on hire purchase transactions. But in 1974, we had a separate statute that deals with hire purchase transactions. And hire purchase is the second semester topic that we would actually look at, right? So then, what is sale of goods contract? What is the nature and formation of a sale of goods contract? For us to appreciate this, we have to refer to section 1.1 of the Sale of Goods Act. That is why I encourage you to actually get the Sale of Goods Act so that we would be making references to it and that will help you or guide you in your studies. So, the Sale of Goods Act, section 1.1, defines or talks about the the contract of sale of goods, and it says a contract of sale of goods is a contract. I'm taking it again. A contract of sale of goods is a contract where the seller agrees to transfer the property in goods to the buyer for a consideration called the price, consisting wholly or partly of money. A contract of sale of goods is a contract whereby the seller agrees to transfer property in the goods to the buyer for a consideration called the price, consisting wholly or partly of money. So if we say that a contract of sale of goods is a contract, then you have to understand or know that all the principles that we learned in the first year or second year, as far as contract is concerned, we would be importing some of these principles in commercial law to help us understand the principles that we will be exploring. So, what are some of the principles that we learned in contract law? Don't forget that in the first semester, we looked at the 4 elements of a valid contract: offer and acceptance, number one; number two, intention to create legal relations; number three, capacity; and number four, consideration. Even in this definition, you hear consideration. A contract of sale of goods is a contract whereby the seller agrees to transfer property in goods to the seller for a consideration, right? So every principle that you learned under consideration applies to a sale of goods contract. So, what are the elements of this definition in section 1.1? What are the elements that you have to take note of? In every sale of goods contract, just like any other contract, because it's a contract, you actually get the agreement. So every contract of sale of goods deals with agreement. Because how did we define contract? We said a contract is an agreement consisting of exchange of promises which the courts recognize as giving rise to enforceable rights and obligations. So one of the key elements of a contract of sale of goods is agreement, which constitutes exchange of correspondence between the parties. The second element is the parties. The parties. And in this contract of sale of goods, the parties, we only have two parties. We have the buyer and the seller, or the seller and the buyer. So a contract of sale of goods is a contract where the seller agrees to transfer the property in the goods to the buyer, right? So seller and buyer. Another element is goods, or we'll say transfer of property in goods, right? So another essential element in section 1.1 is the transfer of property in goods. So if I am the seller, the goods are mine, I can decide to deal with the goods any way I want to deal with them. If you come and take them without my consent, you have stolen, right? But if there is transfer of property in those goods from me to you, they become yours, and you can deal with those goods how you want to deal with them. Then we also have the final one, which is consideration. Consideration. And don't forget consideration. We learned consideration in the law of contract. But over here, we are saying the consideration, which is called the price. And this price can consist either wholly or partly of money. So many of the time when we buy things, we can either pay money, or you can give any other thing that is what valuable to you in exchange of that thing, right? So it can either consist wholly of money or partly of what? Of money. So what have we learned so far? We are learning sale of goods, an introduction into sale of goods, commercial law. And we are saying that sale of goods is a contract. So we say a contract of sale of goods is a contract whereby the seller agrees to transfer property in goods to the buyer for a consideration called the price, which consists wholly or partly of what? Money, right? So anytime there is a transfer of goods, and we'll come and look at what are what? Goods from a seller to the buyer for a consideration called the price, then you have a sale of goods contract. And we have been in this situation before. You have been a seller before. You have been a buyer before. And you've exchanged an item for something. So all that we will be looking at is what are the responsibilities of the seller, what are the responsibilities of the buyer, what is the price, what happens in transfer of property. This is something that you will understand, right? Don't think that it's too difficult and you will not be able to do it. So leave this session that you understand what is in section 1.1 of the Sale of Goods Act, that a contract of sale of goods is where the seller agrees, that is, enters into an agreement with the buyer to transfer the property in the goods to the buyer if the buyer is ready to give a consideration, which is called the price, wholly or partly of money. You are done. In your own words, how do you explain this without memorization? Right? So, this is the short content I want to give you on this. When I meet you again, I will be discussing certain forms of contracts which are similar to sale of goods contract, but they are not sale of goods contract, right? That is what I'll be doing with you in my next session. Until I meet you again, stay blessed. As always, get in touch with JCC, and we are always available to help you in your legal education. Until I see you again, bye for now.